Right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to give a couple of minutes for everybody to get joined and settled, and then we'll jump into our conversation. We can kick off the chat as well. I love to see where people are joining from. We usually get people from all over the world. So if you want to test out the chat and put where you're calling in from, we'd love to see. I'm personally calling in from a very small town in Colorado. I'd be impressed if anyone's familiar with it. It's called Florissant. I think the population was like 130 on the sign or something. So it's very small, but near Colorado Springs. We have Amber in Houston and David in London. So we are very spread out. Looks like we have a couple from Florida, Chicago-ish. We were just talking about the Chicago Marathon. From Canada, Paris. Yeah, we are all over the place. I love this. We'll give just 1 or 2 more minutes for everybody to get joined. I'll keep an eye on it when it starts to taper off, but we are using the chat, so feel free to participate in the conversation via the chat, put in questions through the chat or the Q&A. This is an interactive discussion, so we'll try to incorporate those as we go or cover any at the end. We also will be emailing out a recording of this session, so if you have to hop off or you just want to reference it or share it with someone later, you will be getting that in your email, so keep an eye out. And then at the end, we will also share the SHRM and HRCI codes, so stick around for that. Let's see, it looks like the number's still going up just a little bit, so give it just 1 more minute. Looks like we're making some connections in the chat too, which I also love. We'll share our LinkedIn profiles to connect with us and our companies. And if you want to connect with others in the chat, we've had people do that successfully too. So feel free to make some friends. All right, I think it's slowing a little bit, so we'll get started. I'm going to do some introductions and then we'll get into the discussion. So my name is Ashley. I'll be moderating today. I'm with GoCo, which is an all-in-one HRIS. So we'll have a little bit of information about that if you want to check us out. And then David is calling in from 360 Learning. Do you want to introduce your product too?
Yeah, absolutely. So 360 Learning is an enterprise-ready collaborative learning platform powered to solve the skills problem. So very exciting business to be in right now.
And then we'll do some speaker introductions. So Amber, also from GoCo, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Amber Anzalone. I'm our Senior People Operations Manager at GoCo. And I've had the opportunity really just to be a part of our people experience journey at GoCo. A little history is I started my career journey in marketing and business development, quickly realized I loved people. I just loved the internal people. So shifted into culture and HR, and I've been thriving there, just loving the engagement and helping our group just grow into the max potential that they all have within them.
Awesome. And David, a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Chief Learning Officer at 360 Learning. I am host of the Learning and Development podcast. And I suppose most interestingly, I'm the former Director of Learning Talent and OD for the Walt Disney Company, Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
Awesome. So broad experience here. Hopefully you can connect with our speakers on some level with their experience. And we are going to dive right into the topic. So in case you maybe forgot, the webinar you're joining today is called Cultivating a Culture of Continuous Growth and Development. So let's start off talking about what is the reality of a culture of learning.
I'll jump straight in. So I think it's always great when we start with questions to really understand what something like that might look like. When you say a culture of learning, for those that don't know or are not familiar with that term, but it's just the idea that we really want to, in our space at GoCo specifically, foster an agile culture where people are able to change quickly, because we don't like to hold on to this concept of, well, this is the way that we've always done it. It doesn't work with how our environment is. And so we try to be really open to new ideas. Even during onboarding, we ask every new hire, hey, what ideas do you have? How do you like to learn? Are there things that we could do better and improve? But really just always trying to think of ways to take your culture of learning and to continue to grow it and take it to the next level. But what about you, David? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll build on what you'd said there, Amber. I think that from one perspective, the way I see it is that that a culture of learning is one that serves the organization, and of course there's key reasons for that. That there are skills gaps and growing skills gaps, and the half-life of skills, AI disrupting jobs as we know it. So our organizations need the skills in order to survive and thrive today, which is getting harder and harder, both because there are demographic shifts, because younger people are staying in roles and organizations for less time, and emerging skills are harder to find. But then when you look at the other side as well, is that the jobs market is more insecure than it's ever been. And so the learning culture needs to serve the individual as well, so that they are prepared and ready within their roles. And if that means that there's a shorter tenure in an organization, you want to understand the culture, the technical aspects, and understand how to do more of the right things, but also that you want the opportunities to progress. I do think that there is more of an impatience for people who want to progress and want to progress on their own terms. So I see a learning culture as one that understands the organization and the demographics of the workforce in order to service both. And I think it's really handy to say what it's not. I don't think a healthy learning culture necessarily is one that has to engage in just the learning and development function. I think that you can have a healthy learning culture and a dysfunctional learning L&D function that doesn't serve to meet those needs. But the perfect situation is that you have an efficient learning and development function that does service both of those needs.
What are some challenges that organizations face when trying to foster this culture? I think you both hinted at some, and I was hearing some macro level like AI and the changing workforce, but what about on the both levels? So that and within the organization itself, implementing that can come with some nuances.
Can I start this time, Amber? Because I'm gonna throw out there right. So what are we? 7 minutes in. I'm going to say my first contentious statement. I think effective learning and development is often not what people expect and request in an organization. There was a study done published by the PNAS that I was drawn to from Michelle Ocker's brilliant Learning Uncut podcast, in which employees overvalue passive learning experiences. So if you're going to ask people what they prefer, they're going to tell you classrooms, whether it's the most effective and efficient way of them achieving what they are trying to do in any given organization. Stakeholders will do so as well, because the buying and selling of a training course is a well-trodden path. It's what's expected in any given organization. And by the time learning and development are involved, the training course has often been sold. But we're talking solutions before we understand problems. So I think that a real challenge that we face in any attempt to foster and harvest an effective and efficient learning culture is that we have to lead against the will sometimes of some of our most powerful and populous workforce. That the most important part is the analysis. And after the analysis, it's the efficient way of addressing what the analysis brought out. But the problem is that people expect platforms filled full of content to cover every and any eventuality, and a broad curriculum in which people take time out of work, recuperate, build the relationships, and all of this lovely stuff that we all enjoy. But when it comes down to it, we can't say whether that made any planned, predictable, or meaningful impact as a result. And I think therein lies a big problem for us. Amber, I don't know, would you like to add anything to that?
Just listening and knowing where the conversation's going today, I'm already thinking about other things that we're going to talk about. But I think that when we think about it from like an employee perspective and an employee level, and how you can be powerful in your organization, like feeding off of what David just said, the analysis part, capturing the feedback of people, even if you are not able to quickly move on the stuff that is provided or the feedback that you're given, it's about the communication that follows through to it. So building that relationship slowly while you start to have those conversations to understand what those needs are. A lot of the times, really, what David said too is like, we're not always really aware of what we need. We think we know what we need and what we want, but we're not always really aware of our learning style or our communication style. And that's where that manager and employee relationship is really going to drive home the initiatives of the L&D functions that they're trying to go after. So making sure that you get that buy-in from your manager to try to prepare them to adapt from any change or resistance to change that might come up. Because people naturally, we're creatures of habit and we love just to stick to what we know. And so starting to make it a fun conversation, going back to that culture of learning of if someone doesn't process something right the first time, and being excited about like, hey, no, we want you to fail in safe ways and we want to uphold that. And just using and leveraging your people managers to really get that buy-in to work towards those initiatives when that change does arise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, follow up to that, getting into this next section. The world has changed recently, as we've discussed some elements that have changed with how we design and implement L&D initiatives. So what has stayed the same in implementing those programs with recent changes, and what is different?
David, I'm going to let you jump in on this one because I'd be curious to hear how you're going to answer it.
Yeah, sure. Guy Wallace, who entered learning and development in 1979. I haven't known him ever since then. I've been aware of Guy's work for about a decade, and I've had the privilege of working with him. He drew my attention to the foreword of a book that was published in 1969 in talking about how we need to be performance oriented and focus on the outcomes rather than providing learning. And he used the phrase within there. He said, "You can't get there from here." So providing learning cannot predictably and reliably affect performance. Only planning to affect performance can affect performance. And he wrote that in 1969. So actually, in direct response to what you said, the thing that stayed the same is that we continue to ignore the work of people who have already trodden this path. The books have already been written, and the methodologies have existed for a long, long time. But in learning and development, because, and I mentioned it earlier, learning and development often doesn't have the internal political capital, and it's not given the political capital in order to deliver what's required. It's often the absence of political capital means it delivers what it's asked. And I think that that's one of the things that has remained the same across learning and development, that we often get credit for launching and implementing something new, whether it's planned to deliver results or whether it actually does deliver results. So I think that what's actually required here is, I could go back to it, I think it's two things: analysis and leadership. It's the analysis to seek to understand the problems, and the leadership to actually drive the change that's required. But as I said, the system is often supported by the status quo, and I think that again we've got ourselves into a heap of trouble, because I think I looked up a stat earlier on. The L&D market is estimated to be worth $402 billion a year by the end of next year. That's $402 billion. I listened to another podcast the other day, and that's more than China spends on defense. It's a huge amount of money, and we don't know how much of that equates to impact. I think that's what stayed the same and what needs to change, in my opinion. Amber.
Okay, Ashley, I'm going to jump ahead. I hope it's okay. But I guess what I'm hearing you say makes me really curious about how do you then drive the impact to help everyone in the business, not just leadership, but every individual in the business really understand the impact L&D is taking on with the organization. And in my mind, that quickly aligns to organizational goals and alignment, right? Of not only are we trying to do this, but these are the goals and how do you align it. We're actually really experiencing this right now at GoCo, in our environment of how do we set these business goals, but then really help them understand at all of these different levels within the organization how every person impacts it. Because when you talk about alignment to the business, hey, I know that my performance metric as a contributor to the organization overall really is impacted because it levels up to this goal within my department, and then within the business strategy overall, like, wow, that's alignment, right? Because then the employee is really feeling this drive for making this impact overall. So I'm a huge advocate of helping that alignment gap and having it in place when we think about training and developing. I would be curious, David, what your perspective on that one is, because that's kind of what I kept hearing when you said political capital of, well, how do you get that?
Yeah, so I think that there's a couple of things touched on, and having run talent development, OD, and L&D at Disney, I know that the alignment of those three are absolutely critical, because if we're just talking about learning, then what you've just mentioned there about goal alignment and performance management is in the realm of OD. And so the fact that you've got those lined up is really critical to us making sure that our spend on learning initiatives equates to a planned impact. But the political capital I meant was the as a manager or a leader, gaining support for your ideas, and then the backing and sponsorship of key influential figures in your organization, so that instead of providing learning, which is the broader expectation in learning and development, one of the reasons that we've not been able to progress more prominently or prevalently see impact from our investment and our spend, is because we're told what to do. It's the whole order takers. That business alignment doesn't mean fulfilling the request. Business alignment means, as you mentioned there, Amber, that you understand the KPIs of any given part of your organization, and we're brought in to help critical points of failure. And I've done this in my career, that you build the political capital a lot of the time by taking the order and adding a but, so I would do what you say, but if we add this bit, I think that this is more likely to get an outcome. Over time, you become a trusted partner rather than the order taker. And then at the end, you become relied upon. So when I'm sitting at the board, like the EMEA board, and someone says to me, I need your help with turning a country around, I say yes, and then I partner and we get that done. And I think that that's very different, that many don't get to the stage of being the trusted partner or even the business enabler, because they're happy getting the credit, or the system doesn't allow them to give everybody enough credit here, because some people really are at the mercy of their organization and what they're able to do. But if you can't move from order to taker to trusted partner to business enabler, then you are impotent to a degree, and you're either happy in the system and you find the happiness in the system, or otherwise you have to move through in order to get the fulfillment. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, I'm resisting not taking notes myself hearing some of this too. It's good. It's good insight, really thinking about the development of the individuals who are going after these goals in the organization themselves as well. So yeah, it's good stuff.
Right. And if anybody else has got any questions, please let us know in the chat. And I think that we've already gone pretty deep, but I would say that there is my field of expertise. Somebody asked me what my specialism in L&D was. It was knowing how to get the right stuff done. It doesn't matter how hard. So so I think that any comments there would be very welcome.
Yeah, definitely. And this is connecting to a lot of our other topics that we talk about. I think this is a broader theme among HR and people operations professionals of how to go from that order taker position to a leader in any initiative. So I, going a little off script, but based on the conversation, I was wondering if you both had tips for how to do that, because I think conceptually, the majority of us are likely in agreement that that's a transition that needs to happen. But once you sit down to try to do it, how do you get buy-in from leadership? What role does your leadership play in your process? How much can you do before you bring it to them? How do you present it to them? Are there any actionable tips or tools and things like that you'd recommend?
Yeah, that's always the great question of how do we get to that shift? And I think when we think about where we are today in this environment, we can have a lot of passion, but we have to support our passion with data, with numbers. And maybe you don't have that, and that's okay. That gives you a foundation for a starting point. That means surveying or doing your research. You've heard David quote several different resources, even in this conversation. People want to know, and there are people out there that are doing the research and doing the studies. Don't reinvent the wheel. Find out what's out there. Figure out what's going to work best for your environment. Do not be afraid of AI. ChatGPT is my best friend. I think that it's a great resource that we can leverage. It allows you to do your job faster and more effectively. And that's really what's going to help you move quickly and think about it. Even if that means you don't know how to start the conversation, you can ask, this is what my task is. How do I view this task from a business lens? What does this mean for the business? I mean, it's going to give you the opportunity to start to look at these different perspectives. And that's really what's going to start moving you through. It's not just the expectation of this is my perspective to complete my task, but how does this task actually impact the business? And starting to ask those questions to take these different vantage points, because it's really going to elevate your way of thinking as you problem solve and approach different initiatives moving forward. But what are your thoughts, David?
So everything you said there, Amber, and I'm going to go into the developing your profile in your organization. Interestingly, I spoke with Christopher Lind, who is the CLO at ChenMed, on the podcast about a month ago, and that episode comes out on the 5th of June. And it was exactly about this topic. He's been at ChenMed 3 years, and he said, I spent 2 years meeting people. All I did was talk about their business, find out about their family. I tried to find out what was their problems, not their learning problems. So, and I related. I did this at Disney. I mean, the European head office is in London, so I could meet all of the business heads there, and I used to ask them, how's business? And they'd tell me how business was. So I got to know them by only talking about their problems. They didn't get to know me by me talking about the learning solutions, because that's what the other person before me did. And that's why they were the training person. And I didn't want to be that. I wanted to do this on a different level. Then those conversations turn into, hey, David, can I chat? That was really useful, that conversation we had. Can we carry that on? I know that this does take time. So Christopher Lynn said this took him 2 years, and 2 years of all that hard work. Then he was able to say, right, I know what we need now. This is what we need. And he got the support because he had that momentum. And so this is what I'd say, that it's about the relationships. There are some keys to it. There was number one, you always ask how's business, right? You ask a business person, how's business? It's really funny that you could see the same person and ask the same question, and they'll never think that you're reading from a script. It's really, really powerful. The next one is you don't talk learning, that you don't talk your process, you don't talk your approaches or your models, you talk about what's happening. Right, so I remember I did some work with a team in the character voices at Disney. It's a dysfunctional sounding team, and it was a dysfunctional working team. But we had all those guys on the phone, and we workshopped until we got a level of understanding. We didn't talk about learning. We workshopped with one basic outcome, and that was over time. This dysfunctional team needed to understand each other better. But that came about because I was interested enough to find out that was a problem. And so we switched that. And so I'd say it's about the hard yards. that you stand for helping your business. And the only way you could do that is not by them understanding what you do, but you understanding what they do and really caring. And after that, it's about making sure that you are impact focused. And there's all sorts of ways you could do that. And if you know what the problem is, you mentioned it earlier, Amber, you can fail. But if you understand what you're trying to achieve and you fail when you're trying to achieve that, you know to go again. So there will have been times when I would have been asked to run a Myers-Briggs session, and it will be because of XYZ, and it had already been sold that way. But then we'd come back and I'd do a review with the stakeholder, and they'd say afterwards, it didn't really help. And then we'd be able to say, right, okay, should we try a different type of analysis? So you become known for impact, but you don't, rather than the toolkit. And I think that that's really important. And maybe that's something that's changed. You mentioned, Ashley, over the years.
Yeah.
L&D people always used to be judged by their toolkit. And I don't think that's the only tool you really need, well, I suppose two, is what you use for analysis and the approach you take for consulting. Because if you know what the problem is and you have the guile and the will to get that from a stakeholder, the solution is so much easier to design and deploy or even recognize. So that would be my my big tip. It's the relationship and talking about business.
I want to jump right back into what you're saying too, just to give a different perspective, because I think everything that you're saying is applicable, but it takes me back to, well, what if you're still an order taker? How do you get to that point to where you're having these conversations? And someone actually mentioned in the chat that they're having a hard time, or what do you do if you don't have that trust yet? Like, how do you even establish that trust to then talk about those relationships? And this is what's worked for me, so I'm just going to give that disclaimer. But people love to tell their story. They do. We all have a story to tell. We all want to tell it, and that goes right back to exactly what David was saying, was talk about business. Maybe that's not where you start with some of your different levels that you're having these conversations with. Maybe it's more, how's the team doing? How are you doing? Just getting that person started. Tell me a little bit about your background and how you ended up where you are. Even if it's someone that you've worked with for 10 or 15 years, there's always still insight in that. People will reveal those things about themselves where they do need the support in conversation, and just be mindful of that, and know that not one conversation isn't going to get you there. It's those frequent touch points. It's remembering those small things. These are the elements that are going to help you go to that partnership. I think when you said partnership, that was another buzzword for me of, that's exactly what you want to be, right? You don't want to elevate yourself over these individuals to say, do as I say, but you want to say, we're in this together. Let's leverage our relationship, collaborate, and figure out how to move this rock together, because your success is my success. And that partnership, that buy-in, the person's not only going to feel like you're investing in the overall success for their group or their department or whatever that looks like. You're investing in them. You're investing in their success to level them up. I think something else that's changed is this role of the manager, the people manager. It's even the term management or being a manager. We don't even use that term. We like to call our people managers. And then because we want the people aspect to really stand firm, there's so much influence and impact that a manager has over an individual's experience. That is the individual that you want them to build a relationship with the most. My role specifically, I do all of my coaching through the manager to take the conversation back to the employee. I don't give my coaching to the employee because I want that relationship to grow between those individuals. That's the person that's invested in their journey and their career growth. Like, you want that buy-in and that alignment. And so just getting to a position where you can have those types of relationships with your leadership or your management team or whatever that looks like in your role, that's really where you want to think about that as, how do I start to form this partnership with them?
Mm-hmm. I loved the anecdote you shared too, David, about how it took him 2 years to develop that trust, because I think that's a good level set, that these things don't necessarily come easily or quickly. So it can help set expectations for what kind of timeline you may be looking at for developing that trust. The other thing it made me think of is A question we have here, how do you balance the need for formal training programs with informal learning opportunities in a continuous learning culture? Because I think that's something that's at the heart of this topic too. You can create those learning opportunities even without that buy-in in other small ways. Maybe you haven't gotten a chance to do the full, beautiful, elaborate program that is your very end goal, but how do you balance that, and what can you do in the meantime as you're building up for that?
My advice would be, you've always got to answer the question, what for? And I think that then it emerges. So what continuous learning means for an employee and what it means for L&D are very different. So the way the question's phrased, and I do realize that it's in the chat, and so perhaps we're being efficient with our words, and we're amongst L&D friends. But the employee doesn't care about formal and informal learning. They're in work to do their work better and faster, to be recognized and improve their prospects. How can you help them to do that really efficiently? And that is the absolute key word. So they define the metric to do the work better and faster, to be recognized and improve their prospects. And I use the word prospects there because it doesn't mean promotion. It might be more pay, it might be more freedom, but their prospects are defined by themselves as well. Now, we're all very busy and getting busier, being expected to do, and there's this new phrase, better with less, not more with less, better with less. So how can you engage them? And I think that's the answer to your question. Because when we think about formal and informal learning, we're creating learning events and learning resources. But can we be more efficient? And I think that, so this is why I'm a big fan of Godfreyson and Moshe, and the 5 moments of need, because they will always say, if you start at the moment of apply, which is what you want people to do, and then help them where they are, help them one step removed, and then, so you're looking to create a system around them, and education is the last resort. And I think that with formal learning, it's often the most expensive and time-consuming all round of everything that we do. And there was also some study that was published by D. Greed in, I think, about 2018, surveyed some people. I think 77% of people said they hadn't completed a course of any kind in the last 2 years. So we can't get to everybody with a formal learning event. So what it comes back down to is, who are we trying to help? What are they trying to do? And how can we help them the most efficiently? And if we think like this, and again, it starts with knowing and the analysis. The more we can know, the faster we can get to them, the quicker we can deploy, the faster we can iterate, get out and move on to something else. And instead of addressing, say, 10 to 15 L&D initiatives a year based on learning paths or formal learning, we can literally do hundreds, because it starts with knowing rather than assuming. And so I think that's really important for us. And it gets more and more difficult at scale with enterprise. And this is why I'm such a big fan of skills-based learning, because you can do the analysis, a great deal of the analysis with AI, which again provides you with a level of knowing that you can validate with a stakeholder. But I don't know whether we're going to come to that elsewhere. I'd love to know your thoughts, Amber.
I mean, I don't know that I have much to add to that, just hearing what you've said through it. So I'm just consuming and taking it in. I think that there's in my role specifically, as I think through these things, there's so much overlap in these different avenues that I'm waiting for it to come up, and I'm trying to sit on it. But honestly, it's culture. Before we even talk about a culture of learning, I just keep sitting on this word. And when we're going to enter it into the conversation of, there's so much that's being provided here, but my advice or my area of caution is always to take a step back and say, what does the culture climate of the business overall look like? Because as we try to implement all of these things, and as we think about all of these suggestions, you can come at it with just so much passion and ready to take it on. But if the culture of the business isn't there yet, it may not, you may just hit a brick wall, and it may not go the way that you're hoping. And I think I'm pulling that from you talking about why is such an important concept that not everyone is always willing to think about. But when we're talking about this day and age in workforce, where we're really talking about all of these other skills, not just technical skills, but these other really powerful people skills, that just how to have a conversation, or how not to even take things personally, like just some of these basics that we all assume everyone knows. And we should be more mindful of that, of how that impacts our culture. Even something as simple as saying, like, assuming best intent in your culture, does that exist? I don't know. I don't know what each of your cultures look like and how they're very specific to each person. But it's just always taking that step back, really, to have those conversations and partnerships of other departments. So maybe you're not the one directly responsible for overall business culture, but you can then have that and get that buy-in from your people team or your HR team and work together with them to really move this faster. Because you also are, as they develop in talent, you're also focusing on developing talent as well through their learning journey. So I think culture is just a thing I keep sitting on hearing you as you talk about the why, like so much of the why, just really being mindful of that. It's really how we lead today.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add something to that as well, Amber? That you know, I am so hot on this about culture and the role that learning and development can have, not in changing the culture, but unpacking it for people to use, because the people that get on in our organizations are the ones that understand how to get the right things done in the right way. I will admit, at Disney, I was 8 years there, and I used to, we used to get external facilitators to come and lead the sessions, but I would open a lot of them. And no word of a lie, I rarely saw any of our top talent on any training that we put on, ever. So I used to ask myself the question, why are they not there? And secondly, how are they doing this so well without us? And I think that some people have an intuition, or they've learned it and they are role modeling from other people to understand. And maybe they've got access to people who are doing all of this the right way in meetings, perhaps, you know, as a line manager, as colleagues and peers. And some people develop early on an ability or a will to network and to truly get under the skin of what successful behavior looks like in our organization. Now, I think one of the big challenges that we have, I suppose there are two challenges based on what I've mentioned before. If people are spending less time in organizations, are they truly getting to understand the culture, like as they come in and then move out? But if more of us are working remotely, how are we role modeling those behaviors? It's not about those water cooler moments. It's about being invited. You know, we've all done it. Like, you'd be invited to a meeting that should have been an email. Those were a waste of time unless you're utilizing that opportunity to see what the most influential people are doing, the expected and rewarded behaviors of every given organization. So what I thought when you were saying that, Amber, is what role can we play in learning and development so that we don't remove the technical aspect, the cultural aspect from a technical role. So, you know, a marketer in GoCo, or a marketer at 360, or a marketer at Disney will do a certain thing in a certain way that's expected and rewarded. The technical aspect's the same. The cultural nuance is different. We've all met people, you know, joining our organizations. You shake their hand, they come across as really nice people, but over the course of half an hour or so, kind of leave them. You leave them in the corridor, and you think, I'm not sure they're going to last. Now, it's because so much is left for them to figure out. But how can we open up the organization and say, this is how things work? At Disney, if the decision was made by consensus, a lot of the time decisions were made before you got to the meeting where the decision was made. So how do you prepare people to actually succeed in your organization? And I think that's the question I think that we could all be asking.
And you know what's really fun with this too is our senior L&D specialist actually leads training and will fully own developing and trying to, with our new employees, like take on that culture. That specifically, we have a whole segment because we're a fully remote company. We're running into that same experience of, we assume the culture is just well known. We share the values and the mission statement. No, it's great. You love it. But if it's not happening in their climate, right, we say we foster a continuous feedback culture. But then, you know, we have conversations with others where we find out there's not a lot of actual active feedback going on. People don't find out their performance until their 6-month review. That's not fostering our culture. So if we educate the employees, we create this environment where it's okay to fail, but it's also really okay to ask questions and be curious. I think curiosity is a really powerful tool done in the right way. And then they're able to really reinforce and be the advocates of our culture. And then, of course, like employer ran groups to ensure that that's taking place. But it's been, someone actually said it in the chat of like, well, I can't even get leadership to attend to my trainings, right? And so that in itself is frustrating, but that's such a call out of what your culture is. Because if you don't, I don't know how to answer the question, well, I see senior leadership isn't living our value, why should I? How do you honestly answer it? And that's a tough one because it comes up sometimes. And the reality is you own it, right? I know, but we're working towards it. We want to continue to evolve and try to do better. And so if you want to continue to give me your perspective, we'll take it into consideration, just validating that we're hearing what they're saying. I mean, just letting them know that we're working towards it are the practical tips I think that I always try to take on. But the impact of culture is so powerful, and it goes through really training it. You can't just assume it's adopted, but you have to speak to it, and then it's just like any learning journey: reinforce, reinforce, reinforce it. Just don't talk about it one time, but talk about it all the time. Build it into all of the aspects, including learning and development.
Mm-hmm. This is reminding me of a leadership conversation we had at GoCo towards last year. Our company has grown so much over the past couple of years. When I joined less than 5 years ago, there were about 40 employees, and now we have about 200 across the world. And I remember we hit this moment where a lot of the leaders from the company were like, do we even understand our own culture at the moment? And we kind of had to reevaluate, reassess, poll people, ask the employees from all across the business, what is GoCo culture now? It had evolved so much from when we had started at the company. So it's making me think of that moment. And even if we had identified then what a culture of learning could look like within that culture, it wouldn't have been accurate for the business. So it's something that is so hard to tackle because it can be so evolving so quickly, and you really have to have a pulse on it at all times. So I think this is a great conversation. And I see Amber, the word you were sitting on, you hit on something because the chat has a lot of feedback as well. Some of the comments I'm noticing are talking about, what if your culture is top down? How do you change it? You may be stuck. I know you've shared some tips already, but just to put a point on it, are there any other really strong tips that you've seen work for how to get into that culture, make any changes, especially if it is from top down?
Yeah, I think that even if it feels like culture is top down, it's very likely that there are two cultures that exist, right? There's the top down culture, and then there's this other culture that no one's really addressing or talking about. And I think that what's really powerful is to understand what that culture is. That goes back to the relationship building, to understand what is existing. And let's say you don't know what your culture is. It's just asking questions like, hey, how do you think we should process incentivizing people? What do you think is the thing people enjoy most in our environment? Or how do you think people like to learn on your team? It's asking these thought-provoking questions of trying to be a little more, just have a little more discovery into the spaces that you're in, and you're going to start to find similar answers. I know that typically all businesses are shaped differently, but some really like to focus their questions and their feedback from management level or people leaders and higher. But there's a lot of power and knowledge and information in your talent group if you have the conversations with them, which maybe bandwidth wise isn't always possible, but there are cultures that exist whether you want them to or not. And if you can find those cultures and you can call them out quickly, then you have the power and the ability to try to actually reframe it. But you have to acknowledge it. That means the bad feedback in the employee survey, or that one comment that you're like, well, only one person gave that. It doesn't mean that much. That's not true. It just means one person was brave enough to be willing to talk about it. And so when you think about relationship and asking these questions, you're going to likely get a really hard no. And it really roots down to, what is your psychological safety in your business? Ask that question, be aware of it, and then really think about how to build the culture from there, or have these conversations with your HR group. And the psychological safety is just, do people feel safe to talk honestly and openly about what's going on in the business? And do they feel the safety in sharing that information? I think that there's just a lot of information in that area, but that's my area that I focus on. So that's why I'm getting so passionate and rambling. So I'm going to stop there. David, it looks like you've had some thoughts, and I want to hear what you have.
Yeah, interestingly, I had a podcast conversation with a consultant called Lily Roy recently, and she's a change catalyst. And so we talked about the culture diagnosis that she does. She's ex Deloitte. So I was really interested in this diagnosis to understand how culture shows up. So what is the culture based on how it is expressed? And I think that any leader should be intrigued to know how their culture manifests. And then I think it's up to a leader and the leadership team as to whether they want to acknowledge it, whether they want to own it, or whether they want to change it. But I think that but by starting with robust analysis and diagnosis, has got to be powerful for anywhere. Imagine that. I mean, there's got to be no leader, no conscientious leader who doesn't want to achieve what the organization's there to do. And so if the culture is counter to what they're trying to achieve, then everyone's invested in changing that. And that means if their tyrannical approach or they've got a duplicitous side, they tell us the culture's this, but they behave in a way that the culture is that, then some alignment has, or redesign to your point, Amber, has got to be welcomed. But for sure, start with a diagnosis. That conversation with Lily really opened my eyes.
I think this could be a good segue to speak a little bit about the employee experience too. Amber, you mentioned pulling from your broader talent pool, and we've spent a lot of time talking about how to get buy-in at the leadership level, but part of launching any new initiative is also getting buy-in with your employees and getting them on board. So one of the topics to discuss is, do employees even have enough time to learn, and how do you introduce any type of initiative there?
Yeah, I think that was really where culture was going to jump in, and I think that's powerful. And actually, it makes me want to connect some dots as well. Of like David had said earlier, that are the leaders learning? Are they a part of those learning experiences, and are they taking place in those as well? If there is no time, if there's this perception of, you have to get all of these things done, and it's not being seen, it's not being celebrated, that, hey, the CEO just took the time to read this book that's a development initiative, or someone just completed this or got their SHRM certification, or whatever it looks like. If you're not building that at different levels, right, you're not advocating for this environment. Oh, I went on another tangent, Ashley. I'm sorry. But I think that there has to be, in the same way that you want that psychological safety for people to feel safe to share their feedback openly, you have to build a culture that enforces and encourages learning and development time, whether that's through a stipend of like, we want to give you money to make sure that you are committed to your development, or some businesses will give learning and development hours where they want you to block time and take that time so they can track that you're actually getting that development. But you have to bake that in, or people are, number one, are not going to prioritize it, because they're going to feel this pressure of, I have to do what's right in front of me and get that done. Goes back to that performance. But you have to build this climate where people can feel like it's safe to slow down on some of these other initiatives or KPIs and focus on their development. And it can't just be about the process aspect of, how do I advance in my role? Like, you want them to develop as an individual. We say this a lot. I don't know if this is, David, you can come back and tell me if I should continue to say this or not. But when we have conversations about development, we always say, look, we want to make you the best person that you can possibly be, whether it's to stay here and thrive with us, or for your next whatever your next journey is. We just want to make sure that we're creating these really strong performers for just the industry overall, because people are going to look back and say, well, they really grew these skills at GoCo. Like, what's going on there? Like, let's talk about that. We want to have that talent pool, whether they stay with us or whether they move on. We just want to develop these individuals as best we can. But David, what are your thoughts on that one?
So I'll pull on years of running local and regional L&D departments, and I think that I'll come from this from two angles. We had an employee engagement survey, and every year my score came last. Do you have enough time to learn? Almost everyone said no. Right, so I think that there's one, and I'll come back to that in a sec. The second one are the key metrics. Are key people staying? Are key people moving? Are key people engaged? The people that we rated the highest in their performance reviews, are they being rewarded? All of this really important stuff. Learning and development doesn't exist to make better people. Learning and development exists to grow people, to help the organization. There's no benevolence in it. It just so happens that good people work in learning and development. But goes back to impact. What are we there to do? Now, if we don't decide to measure anything other than the time that people learn, and we don't do the outcomes, we're onto a hiding. You know, I think I call this thing the deal, right? You go to interview for a job, you're sitting with your hiring manager and somebody from the talent acquisition team, and you ask about development opportunities, right? And when you ask that question, you're thinking, am I going to grow here? Have I got prospects here? Am I going to move up? Have I got, am I going to achieve my career here? And then the person who answers from HR says, oh yes, we've got we on average people spend 2 days a year learning, and you have a budget of about $1,500. And you look at that and go, yeah, that's you know that my internal benchmark. I think that's about right. And say you did take your 2 days and you spent your $1,500 and you stayed in the same job for 5 years because what you didn't help you. I say the deal doesn't work. That you're not talking about the same thing. So what we need to do is, so going back to, we're dealing with an employee here. Does the employee want to engage in formal learning and take their dollar spend, or do they want to grow in your organization and know that they've got prospects? I think the majority are the second one. I think that everybody would like to enjoy their work and have some interesting experiences, but gone are the days. I remember running training sessions in the early 2000s, and when you went on a training course, somebody else did your work. That's not the case anymore. That changed in the mid-2000s when people got Blackberries and smartphones. Now you did your work while you were doing the training, and if you didn't do that, you do it after the training. So life is squeezed. So what we need to get down to is not talk about whether people have got enough time to learn. It's whether our investment in learning and the commitment that we ask for them is actually leading to what they want it to achieve. And if it's not, we've got to ask ourselves some questions, because talking about culture before, if we had a flourishing learning culture that served the organization and the individual, then we would have people's time to mastery would be pretty short. You'd have opportunities for people to challenge and grow their skills before moving formally. And then you'd have a talent pipeline. You'd certainly be hiring a lot more internal candidates than you would external. And engagement would be higher because it would be like a race. Everybody's got almost a level playing field. But while we're talking about the time that people have, going back to that question at Disney, do you have enough time to learn? Everyone said no, because they'd rather be learning than working, and we're not dealing with the actual problem. I've just popped a link in the chat there. It's an article I wrote for Forbes recently on this very topic, and I think that the time to learn is a misnomer, personally. But I think that what we're trying to answer when we answer that question is really important. I don't know. I don't know if anybody's got anything to add to that.
No, I mean, I don't have anything to add, but it's powerful, and it's just about the perspective of seeing the things from different. I did read the article. I do recommend it. I thought it was very insightful to read as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I see a lot that stirred up a lot in the chat. I think a lot of people can relate to that. And I want to zoom in a little bit to a question about what strategies can organizations use to provide meaningful feedback and opportunities for reflection to employees engaged in continuous learning. So once again, taking it from the broad topic to some actionable tips and tricks people might be able to use.
Amber, would you like to take that?
I was actually ready to take notes to hear what you had to say on that one, David.
Looks like this one's a challenging topic for everyone.
Yeah. No, I think it's any opportunity to. I think that I think mentoring has always been like really powerful, because it's opportunity to take people out of their work to reflect with somebody who understands the constraints and the enablers of any given organization. I think that developing a network in your organization, especially of your peer group, is really important as well, because generally you're restrained and empowered by the same manager. as well, so you can provide that. And that will happen in the coffee queue or at lunch. And that's why I think it's really important that we invest in the relationships with people around us. But as for individual reflection and stuff, no, I'm actually a big fan at 360. I'll blow the trumpet of the organisation I'm working now. We do quarterly reviews. Now, when I first joined, I thought, well, that's overkill. But the actual planning and the conversations so regularly does really keep you focused. And anything that you're talking about, you're reflecting on not that long ago. So I think that those are really useful ones. Like, you know, that's reflection on a pressing priority. I'd love to know your thoughts, Amber.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're very solution driven in my space, and so the things that I'm thinking about of what would I recommend, or what have we utilized that we've seen success in is, I am a context person, and we try to encourage everyone to be a context person because it's just the first way to start building those relationships. And so we actually have an individual development plan, which is something that we've implemented, but we have an initial self-assessment intake on day one where we ask them these different types of questions just to kind of collect and grab information. I mean, we show them what their individual development plan journey would look like when they have conversations, and when those conversations are supposed to take place with the people ops team, or maybe they're supposed to take place with skip level, or even with their direct manager. And so we try to use that strategy to build this journey for them as they start with the business, not day one, because we don't try to overwhelm them, but really trying to help them understand. And then we do these year-long checkpoints where every 30, 60, 90, 6, 9, and 12 months we check in, and we're adjusting to the quarterly performance review metric like you're talking about. And part of the guidance that we provide in our one-on-ones for managers is that, number one, the employee leads and owns those one-on-ones on a weekly basis. And number two, this is the time to have those developmental conversations. Don't wait until those performance reviews every 6 months or once a year to say, hey, look, this is where you could really work on some things. Like, I've asked you your challenges, you've told me them. Well, here's where I also agree you should work on them. And that's the end of the conversation. Weekly, you should be having these conversations of, I'm noticing you're struggling in this area, or hey, you're not moving quickly on this task. Can we talk about why? Do you not feel confident in it? What can I give you to help you feel that confidence? And it's just actively making it a part of that conversation on the weekly experiences, or even monthly, depending on the organization size, and calling it out, not letting those things build up, taking the notes. It's not documentation and then conversation. It's like have that conversation continuously, talk about that development, continuously learn and continuously improve. And Ashley's example about how we had to reevaluate our culture, that is us trying to live out that culture of learning, of continuously evolving. So I think that giving the employees a space, everyone's learning individual development page. They have a portal. It's where their onboarding is. All their different learning journeys exist in this space that we've built internally. But whatever it looks like, giving them something that they can own, asking them to act towards it, to take ownership, to fill it out, to complete it, and then making sure that that information is consumed by the manager and conversations are happening around what they're saying their needs are. That's powerful. That's a powerful strategy of, don't just ask and then act. That's just always, and can keep doing it. I think that that's really what drives the buy-in, and you start to build your alignment.
I feel like I blinked and this conversation flew by. It was so quick, and because it was such a great conversation. So we only have 3 minutes left. So I want to end with one final question of how you evaluate and measure success with an L&D program. It's probably a beefier topic we could do a whole session on, but some final thoughts. And while you're speaking, I'm going to drop some SHRM codes and things like that in the chat. So we'll do dual duty.
Right. I mean, I think I've alluded to it all the way through that your measurement needs to be baked into both your analysis and your design. If you didn't plan to measure at the outset, you've got no chance at the end. And I suppose that's my short answer.